I never thought running a snowmobile repair shop in the White Mountains of New Hampshire would put me at war with a homeowners association. But here I was, staring at a citation for $5,000 because Patricia Pemberton didn't like the sound of engines in the morning. My name is Lucas Quincy, and I had been living in North Conway for 15 years. I bought my property back in 2010, a 3-acre plot with a house, a massive garage, and enough space to run my business repairing snowmobiles and other winter recreation equipment. When I purchased it, there was no HOA. The neighborhood was just a loose collection of mountain folk who valued privacy and independence. Then the developers came in 2018, built a bunch of upscale vacation homes around the existing properties, and suddenly, we had the Mount Washington Estates Homeowners Association breathing down our necks. The whole thing started on a Tuesday morning in January. I was in my shop, which sat about 200 feet from my house, working on a ski-doo that belonged to one of the local tour operators. The engine was spread across my workbench, and I had classic rock playing on the radio. It was barely 8 in the morning, but in my business, you started early during peak season. Snowmobile tourism was huge in this part of New Hampshire, and when someone's machine went down, they needed it fixed immediately or they lost money. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up to see a silver Lexus SUV pulling into my driveway. My stomach sank. I recognized that vehicle. Patricia Pemberton, the HOA president, stepped out wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent and carrying her ever-present clipboard. "Mr. Quincy," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss your flagrant violations of the community standards." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the entrance of my shop. "Morning, Patricia. What seems to be the problem?" She thrust a piece of paper at me. "This is a formal citation. You are in violation of sections 3.7, 4.2, and 8.1 of the HOA bylaws." I took the paper and scanned it. Excessive noise before 9 a.m., commercial activity in a residential zone, unsightly equipment storage. I looked up at her. "Patricia, I was running this business here for 8 years before your HOA even existed. I'm grandfathered in." Her face pinched like she had bitten into a lemon. "The bylaws were updated last month. All properties within the Mount Washington Estates boundaries must comply, regardless of when the business was established. You have 30 days to cease commercial operations or relocate them to an approved commercial zone, and you owe $5,000 in accumulated fines." This is ridiculous. Half the economy in North Conway runs on winter tourism. My shop services the rental companies, the tour guides, private owners. You cannot just shut me down. "I can and I will," Patricia said. "The HOA board voted unanimously. We are trying to maintain property values and quality of life for our residents. Your noisy, dirty operation is incompatible with that vision. My shop is 200 feet from the nearest house, and that house is mine. The next closest property is a quarter-mile away through the trees." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "My property is 0.3 miles away, Mr. Quincy, and I can hear your dreadful machinery every morning. It disturbs my meditation time." I felt my jaw clench. "So file a noise complaint with the town." "The HOA has no authority over my business operations." "Actually, we do. When the boundaries were redrawn last year and the new developments were completed, your property fell within our jurisdiction. You received the notification letter." I remembered that letter. I had thought it was just another piece of junk mail about the development and had thrown it away without reading it carefully. That had been a mistake. "I will fight this," I said. Patricia's smile widened. You are welcome to try. But the fines will continue to accumulate at $500 per day until you comply. Have a blessed day, Mr. Quincy. She walked back to her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that might as well have been a declaration of war. I went back inside my shop and called my lawyer, Tom Davidson. He had handled my business incorporation and a few property issues over the years. When I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. Lucas, this is tricky. If your property really does fall within their jurisdiction now, they might have legal standing, depending on how the bylaws are written and what the local zoning ordinances say. Can they really fine me $500 a day? If the HOA agreement allows it and you technically agreed to it by not contesting when you received notice of inclusion, then yes. But there might be grounds to fight based on the grandfathering argument or by challenging the boundary expansion itself. I will need to do some research. How long will that take? A few weeks at least. In the meantime, I would recommend you stop operating the business until we can get this sorted out. Tom, it is peak season. I have contracts with 3 tour companies, 2 rental outfits, and about 20 private clients who depend on me. If I shut down now, they are screwed, and so am I financially. Then you are going to rack up significant fines. Your call, Lucas. I thanked him and hung up. Then I looked at the Ski-Doo engine on my workbench and the list of repairs scheduled for the week. Shutting down was not an option. Not yet. For the next 2 weeks, I kept working. Every morning, Patricia or one of her HOA cronies would drive by, and every few days I would find another citation in my mailbox. The fines kept climbing. 5,000 became 10,000, then 15,000. I kept meticulous records of every citation and took photographs with timestamps showing that most of my noisier work was happening well after 9 a.m., despite their claims. Tom finally got back to me with bad news. The boundary expansion had been legally executed, and while my business had been grandfathered under the old zoning, the new HOA bylaws technically superseded that because they were more restrictive. My only real option was to apply for a variance or special use permit, but that required HOA approval, which Patricia would never grant. What if I just ignore them? I asked. They can put a lien on your property for the unpaid fines and eventually force a sale to collect. You would lose everything. That night, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and staring out at the snow-covered mountains. I had built something here. My shop was not just a business, it was a vital part of the local tourism infrastructure. North Conway and the surrounding towns pulled in millions of dollars every winter from snowmobiling alone. The trail systems that wound through the White Mountains attracted riders from all over the Northeast. When machines broke down, which they did constantly, people came to me. My phone rang. It was Dave Merchant, who owned White Mountain Snowmobile Tours, one of the biggest tour operators in the area. Lucas, I have got 3 sleds down and my afternoon tours start in 2 hours. Can you help me out? I looked at the stack of citations on my counter. Dave, I have got to tell you something. I explained the HOA situation. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, then he exploded. Are you kidding me? Patricia Pemberton is trying to shut you down. Does she have any idea how much money you generate for this community? I do not think she cares. She wants her peace and quiet for meditation. This is insane. What are you going to do? I do not know yet, but I cannot keep operating and racking up fines. I am already at $20,000. Lucas, if you shut down, you know what happens, right? The nearest other shop that can handle commercial volume is over in Lincoln, 45 minutes away. Most of the operators will not bother. They will just cancel tours or reduce their fleets. The economic impact will be massive. I know, I said quietly. "But what choice do I have?" After I hung up with Dave, I made a decision. I spent that entire night making phone calls. I called every business I had contracts with, every regular client, everyone who depended on my shop. I explained what was happening and told them that I would be shutting down operations in 1 week. The reaction was explosive. By the next morning, the North Conway Chamber of Commerce was calling me. The town manager wanted to meet. Local business owners were furious. But the person who surprised me most was Jennifer Jameson, who owned a small hotel on the outskirts of town. Jennifer and I had known each other for years. She was a smart, tough businesswoman who had built her hotel from nothing. When she called, her voice was tight with anger. "Lucas, I just heard about Patricia's crusade against your shop. This is going to devastate the local economy." "I know, Jennifer. I am sorry. Do not apologize. This is not your fault, but I want you to know something. Patricia Pemberton has been pushing for months to change North Conway's character. She wants it to become some kind of upscale wellness retreat destination instead of an adventure tourism town. She thinks snowmobiles are tacky and loud. This attack on you is part of a bigger agenda." "How do you know this?" "Because she approached me 6 months ago about selling my hotel to a spa development company she is connected with. When I refused, she started filing complaints about my property too. Nothing as severe as what she is doing to you, but death by 1,000 cuts. You are just the biggest target because shutting you down makes a statement." "What kind of statement?" "That she is in charge, and she is going to remake this town in her image, whether we like it or not." That conversation crystallized something for me. This was not just about my business. This was about what kind of community North Conway was going to be. And if closing my shop hurt the tourism economy, maybe that would send a message too. I called Tom Davidson again. "I want to shut down completely and publicly. I want everyone to know exactly why I am closing." "Lucas, are you sure? Once you close, restarting will be difficult. I am sure. Draft whatever statements I need to make it clear that the HOA is forcing this closure. I want the business community to understand what is happening." Over the next few days, I finished up the repairs I had already committed to and returned deposits for work I could not complete. I sent formal letters to all my commercial clients explaining that Mount Washington Estates HOA actions made continuing operations financially impossible. I made sure copies of those letters found their way to the local newspaper, the Chamber of Commerce, and several town council members. The response was immediate and intense. The Conway Daily Sun ran a front-page story. "Local snowmobile repair shop forced to close by HOA dispute." The article detailed my situation and included interviews with several tour operators who explained how my closure would impact their businesses. Dave Merchant was quoted saying he would have to reduce his tour schedule by 40% because he could not get timely repairs anymore. The economic ripple effects started almost immediately. Dave was not exaggerating. He cut his tour offerings in half within a week. 2 other tour operators did the same. The rental shops started reducing their fleets because maintaining snowmobiles without a local repair option was not economically viable. Rental rates went up because of reduced supply, which meant fewer people rented. Fewer tours and rentals meant fewer people coming to town, which meant fewer hotel bookings, fewer restaurant reservations, less gas sold, fewer supplies purchased at local shops. Jennifer called me a week after I closed. "Our bookings are down 18% from last year." 18% in 1 week, Lucas. I have had half a dozen cancellations from people who were planning snowmobile trips, and when they called the tour companies and found out about reduced availability and higher prices, They decided to go somewhere else. Vermont, Maine, even up to Canada. I am sorry, Jennifer. Stop saying you are sorry. This is on Patricia, not you, but you need to know it is going to get worse before it gets better. She was right. By the end of February, the economic impact was undeniable. The Chamber of Commerce released figures showing that winter tourism revenue was down 23% compared to the previous year. Hotel occupancy was down across the board. Several restaurants that depended on winter traffic cut their hours or staff. One small motel on Route 16 announced it was closing permanently. The town council called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I attended, sitting in the back of the crowded community center while business owners stood up one after another to talk about the impact on their operations. Dave Merchant brought charts showing his revenue decline. Jennifer presented her booking data. The owner of a local gas station talked about how his fuel sales were down because fewer snowmobilers meant less traffic. Then Patricia Pemberton stood up, and I felt the temperature in the room drop. While I sympathize with the business concerns, she said, her voice calm and measured, we cannot sacrifice our community standards and property values for commercial interests. Mr. Quincy's operation was incompatible with the residential character we are trying to maintain in Mount Washington Estates. If the tourism industry is suffering, perhaps we should be discussing diversification and attracting a better class of visitor. The room erupted. Multiple people started shouting at once. The town council president, Michael Reeves, had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Better class of visitor. Dave Merchant was on his feet. The snowmobilers who come here spend an average of $300 a day per person. They stay multiple nights. They eat at our restaurants, shop at our stores, buy gas, rent equipment. What exactly is your better class of visitor going to do for us? Patricia smiled that cold smile of hers. Wellness tourists, spa retreats, high-end dining experiences, cultural attractions. These visitors spend more money and create less noise and environmental impact. Those things do not exist here, Jennifer said from her seat. You are talking about completely changing what North Conway is, and even if we wanted to do that, it would take years and millions in investment. What do we do in the meantime? Watch our businesses die. Creative destruction is part of economic evolution, Patricia said. Some businesses will adapt, others will not. That is capitalism. The meeting went on for another 2 hours but accomplished nothing concrete. The town council had no authority over HOA bylaws, and Patricia made it clear she had no intention of backing down. As I walked out to my truck, Jennifer caught up with me. Lucas, some of us are talking about organizing a formal response to this. Would you be willing to join? What kind of response? Legal action, maybe, political pressure, media campaign. Whatever it takes to either get your shop reopened or make Patricia pay a price for what she has done. I thought about it. Count me in. But I want to be careful. I do not want to just attack Patricia personally. This needs to be about the broader issue. Agreed. I will be in touch. Over the next week, a coalition formed. Local business owners, town residents who were not part of the HOA, even some members of Mount Washington Estates who disagreed with Patricia's heavy-handed approach. We called ourselves the North Conway Business Alliance. Jennifer became the de facto leader because she was organized and respected in the community. Our lawyer, not Tom but a more aggressive attorney named Rachel Morris who specialized in HOA disputes, did a deep dive into Mount Washington Estates bylaws and procedures. What she found was disturbing. The vote that Patricia claimed was unanimous to update the bylaws and expand enforcement. It was not actually unanimous, Rachel told us at our first formal meeting. 3 board members voted yes, but 2 were absent, and they never received proper notice of the meeting. Under their own bylaws, that vote was invalid. Additionally, the boundary expansion that pulled Lucas's property into HOA jurisdiction was never properly filed with the county. It has no legal standing. So the whole thing is bogus? Dave asked. Essentially, yes. Patricia has been operating as if she has authority she does not actually have. The fines, the citations, all of it is unenforceable. I felt a surge of relief followed quickly by anger. So I closed my business for nothing. Not for nothing, Rachel said. You made a strategic choice based on what appeared to be legitimate legal pressure, but now we can fight back. We can sue the HOA for the damages you incurred from wrongful intimidation. We can seek an injunction preventing them from interfering with your business. And we can file formal complaints about their procedural violations with the state. What about the other property owners in the HOA who might have been victimized the same way? Jennifer asked. Good question. We should reach out to them. If we can document a pattern of Patricia abusing her position and making up rules that do not actually exist, that strengthens everything. We started investigating, and what we found was worse than I had imagined. Patricia had been targeting multiple people. A family that ran a small craft brewery from their property had been fined for commercial signage that violated non-existent bylaws. An elderly couple who rented out a guest cottage on their land had been cited for operating an illegal hotel. A guy who restored classic cars as a hobby had been ordered to remove his vehicles from his own property because they were supposedly eyesores. In every case, Patricia had cited official sounding bylaws and threatened escalating fines. Most people had just complied because fighting seemed too expensive and difficult. But when Rachel looked at the actual HOA governing documents, many of the bylaws Patricia cited did not exist or had been misapplied. We compiled everything into a detailed report and filed a lawsuit against the Mount Washington Estates HOA and Patricia Pemberton, personally, for harassment, fraud, and intentional interference with business operations. We also sent copies of our findings to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office because some of what Patricia had done potentially crossed into criminal fraud territory. The lawsuit made news. Suddenly, this was not just a local dispute, but a story about HOA overreach and abuse of power. A reporter from the Boston Globe drove up to interview me, Jennifer, and several other victims of Patricia's schemes. The article that came out was devastating for her. It painted a picture of a power-hungry HOA president who had systematically lied about her authority and destroyed businesses and livelihoods to push her personal agenda. The pressure intensified when the Attorney General's office announced they were opening an investigation. Apparently, collecting money through fraudulent fines could be prosecuted as theft by deception under New Hampshire law. I had been closed for 6 weeks when Patricia finally cracked. She showed up at my property unannounced, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had first handed me that citation. She looked tired, her makeup was not perfect, and her hands shook slightly as she knocked on my door. Mr. Quincy, can we talk? I considered slamming the door in her face but decided that would not help anything. Come in. She sat at my kitchen table, and for a long moment she just stared at her hands. I made mistakes, she finally said. Mistakes? Patricia, you destroyed my business. You lied about having authority you did not have. You collected thousands of dollars in fake fines from people who trusted that you were following the rules. I know. Her voice cracked. I just wanted to make the community better. Property values in the development were not rising as fast as projected, and the investors were getting nervous. They pressured the board, and I felt like I had to do something dramatic to show we were serious about maintaining standards. So you decided to drive out the existing businesses that supposedly lowered the tone. Yes, it seemed logical at the time, but I did not think about the consequences. I did not think about how interconnected everything was, how your shop closing would cascade through the whole economy. And I certainly did not think anyone would look closely at the procedural details, because you were counting on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. She nodded, tears now running down her face. I am going to resign from the HOA board. I am going to recommend that all fines collected under the disputed bylaws be refunded, and I will not contest your lawsuit. You deserve compensation for what I cost you. What about the Attorney General's investigation? My lawyer says I will probably face charges. He is working on a plea agreement. I will have to pay restitution and do community service at minimum. I might see jail time. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt tired. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it from me directly. And because I want to ask you something. If I do everything I just said, if I make this as right as I can, will you consider reopening your shop? This community needs you. I understand that now. I looked at her for a long moment. I will think about it, but it is not just my decision anymore. You hurt a lot of people, Patricia. You do not get to just apologize and have everything go back to normal. I know. I will apologize to all of them too, whatever it takes. She left after that, and I sat alone in my kitchen thinking about everything that had happened. 2 months ago, I had been running a successful business, living my life, bothering no one. Then Patricia's crusade had upended everything. Now she was facing criminal charges, the HOA was in chaos, and the local economy had taken a serious hit. Jennifer called me that evening after she saw Patricia's official resignation announcement, which had gone out to all HOA members. "Did you know this was coming?" she asked. She came by earlier and told me in person, said she was going to try to make things right. Do you believe her? I think she is scared and desperate. But yeah, I think she means it. The question is whether it is too late. The damage is real, Lucas. Even if you reopen tomorrow, it will take time to rebuild trust and get the tourism flowing again. We are probably looking at a lost season. I know. But I have been thinking about it, and I do not want to reopen just to go back to how things were. If I do this, I want to do it in a way that protects me and every other small business owner from ever being targeted like this again. What did you have in mind? I have been talking to Rachel. She thinks we can push for county-level protections for businesses that were established before HOA boundaries expanded. Grandfathering protection with real teeth, not just something an HOA can override with updated bylaws. We could also push for oversight requirements on HOA boards, mandatory transparency, limits on fine amounts, appeals processes. That is ambitious. You are talking about changing laws. Yeah, I am. Because if we do not, what is stopping the next Patricia Pemberton from doing the same thing somewhere else? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. I am in. Let us do it. Over the next several months, things moved faster than I expected. Patricia's resignation triggered a complete upheaval of the Mount Washington Estates HOA board. 3 other board members resigned in solidarity with her, or to avoid being associated with the scandal. New elections were held, and several business-friendly candidates won seats. The Attorney General's investigation concluded with Patricia being charged with theft by deception and fraud. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 6 months of home confinement, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $73,000 in restitution to the various people she had fraudulently fined. My lawsuit settled out of court. The HOA's insurance paid me $85,000 to cover my lost business income, legal fees, and the fines I had accumulated. Several other victims also received settlements, but the bigger victory was legislative. Jennifer and I, along with Rachel and the North Conway Business Alliance, lobbied hard at the state level for HOA reform. We testified before committees, told our stories to legislators, and built a coalition that included business groups, property rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who had been burned by overzealous HOAs. It took 2 legislative sessions, but eventually, New Hampshire passed the Homeowner Business Protection Act. The law established clear limitations on HOA authority over pre-existing businesses, required transparent notice and appeals processes for any rule changes, capped fine amounts, and created state-level oversight for HOA governance. It was not perfect, but it was something. By the time the law passed, I had already reopened my shop. It happened in late May, right as the tourist season was shifting from skiing to hiking and summer recreation. I kept my snowmobile repair services, but expanded into ATV and dirt bike repairs too, diversifying so I was not completely dependent on winter business. The grand reopening was a bigger event than I anticipated. The town threw a small celebration. Dave Merchant brought champagne. Jennifer gave a speech about community resilience. Even some of the new HOA board members showed up to formally apologize and promise they would operate transparently and fairly going forward. Business was slow at first. The damage to North Conway's reputation as a snowmobile destination had been real, and it took time to rebuild. But gradually, word spread that things were back to normal and even better than before. Tour operators who had cut back started expanding again. Rental shops restocked their fleets. Marketing campaigns emphasized North Conway's renewed commitment to winter tourism. By the following winter season, we were approaching previous year's numbers. My shop was busy again, maybe not quite as busy as before the whole mess started, but enough to make a living and then some. The community had learned something valuable about the importance of small businesses and the dangers of unchecked HOA power. I saw Patricia Pemberton one more time, about a year after everything went down. I was grabbing coffee at a local cafe when she walked in. We made eye contact, and for a moment I thought she might turn around and leave. Instead, she walked over to my table. "Mr. Quincy," she said quietly, "I know I have apologized before, but I want you to know that I think about what I did every day. I destroyed something precious, and I am genuinely sorry." She looked different, older, more worn. The arrogance that had defined her was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine regret. "I appreciate that, Patricia. Are you doing okay? I finished my community service last month. I have been volunteering at a homeless shelter in Manchester. It has given me perspective on what really matters. I am trying to make amends where I can." "That is good. I hope you find some peace." "Thank you, and for what it is worth, I am glad your business is doing well again." "You were always good at what you did. I was just too arrogant to see the value in it." She left after that, and I sat there thinking about the strange journey we had all been on. Patricia had tried to reshape a community to fit her vision and had nearly destroyed it instead. The business owners and residents had fought back and built something stronger in the process. And I had gone from being a guy who just wanted to fix snowmobiles to being part of a movement that changed state law. Jennifer stopped by my shop a few weeks later. She had news that one of the big outdoor recreation magazines was doing a feature on North Conway's comeback story and wanted to interview both of us. "They are calling it a case study in how communities can push back against HOA overreach and win," she said. We did not just push back. We changed the whole playing field. Exactly, and that is important, Lucas. What happened here could have happened anywhere, but now there are protections in place. You did that. I looked around my shop at the snowmobiles and ATVs in various states of repair, at the tools I had been using for 15 years, at the business I had nearly lost. We did that, I corrected her. This was never just about me, true, but you were the catalyst. You made the hard choice to close your shop instead of just paying Patricia's fake fines and hoping the problem would go away. That forced everyone to see the real cost of what she was doing. I was just out of options. Maybe, but you turned a bad situation into something meaningful. That takes courage. After Jennifer left, I spent the rest of the afternoon working on an older Polaris that belonged to one of the tour companies. It needed a new clutch and some electrical work. As I methodically went through the repairs, I thought about how much had changed in 2 years. The HOA that had tried to drive me out of business was now run by reasonable people who understood their proper role. The businesses that had suffered during my closure were recovering and thriving again. The state had laws protecting people like me from future abuse. And I had learned that sometimes standing your ground and accepting short-term pain was the only way to create long-term change. Dave Merchant picked up the Polaris the next morning and mentioned that he was expanding his tour operation again. He had just purchased 5 new sleds and was adding 2 more guides for the upcoming season. You know what the funny thing is? He said as we loaded the repaired machine onto his trailer. That whole disaster with Patricia probably helped us in the long run. The media attention put North Conway on the map in a new way. People heard about this town that fought back against HOA tyranny and supported its local businesses. We are getting tourists who specifically want to support what we built here. So we are the underdog story everyone wants to root for. Something like that. Plus, the new HOA board has been way more cooperative about things like signage and marketing. We have better trail maintenance because the town got more involved after seeing how important the snowmobile economy is. It all works better now. Silver lining, I guess. More than that, we learned what we were made of. This community could have folded when things got tough. Instead, everyone came together and fought. That is not something you forget. The magazine article came out in October, right before the start of the new winter season. It was a 6-page spread with photographs of my shop, interviews with me and Jennifer and Dave, and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. The headline read, "How One Town Fought Back Against HOA Overreach and Won." The article brought another wave of attention. I started getting calls from other business owners in other states who were facing similar HOA battles. I was not an activist by nature, but I found myself sharing our story, explaining what had worked, offering encouragement. Rachel Morris, our lawyer, started giving seminars on HOA law and using our case as a teaching example. The first big snowfall came in mid-November, earlier than usual. My phone started ringing immediately with repair requests and maintenance appointments. By December, I was booked solid through February. The tour operators were running at full capacity. The rental shops could barely keep up with demand. The hotels were packed. Jennifer called me on Christmas Eve. Our occupancy is at 97%. 97%, Lucas. We have not seen numbers like this in 5 years. That is amazing, Jennifer. You earned it. We all did. Hey, I am having a small thing at the hotel tomorrow, just some friends and local business folks. Come by if you are free. I went. It was nice to celebrate with people who had been through the fight together. We ate too much food, told old stories, and toasted to better days ahead. Someone mentioned that Patricia Pemberton had moved to Vermont, starting fresh somewhere else. I hoped she had learned from what happened and would do better in her new community. As the winter season rolled on, I settled back into the rhythm of my work. Early mornings in the shop, the smell of oil and gasoline, the satisfaction of diagnosing a problem and fixing it, the relationships with clients who depended on me. This was what I had almost lost, and I did not take it for granted anymore. In March, the town council presented me with a community service award at their monthly meeting. It was unexpected and a little embarrassing, but also gratifying. The mayor gave a short speech about how my stand against the HOA had protected not just my own business, but the economic vitality of the entire region. Lucas Quincy reminded us that communities are built by people who are willing to fight for what matters, the mayor said. He lost income, faced enormous stress, and risked everything to stand up for principle. Because of him, we have stronger protections for all property owners and small businesses. Because of him, North Conway is thriving again. We are grateful. The applause was genuine, and I saw Jennifer wiping tears from her eyes in the front row. Dave gave me a thumbs up. Tom Davidson, my original lawyer who had helped me navigate the early stages of the fight, nodded approvingly. When I got home that night, I sat on my back porch looking out at the mountains. The stars were incredibly bright, and the air had that crisp cold that meant winter was not quite done with us yet. I thought about the journey from that first morning, when Patricia had handed me a bogus citation, to this moment, holding a plaque that recognized my contribution to the community. It had been one of the hardest things I had ever gone through. Closing my business, even strategically, had felt like giving up. Watching the economic impact ripple through town had been painful. The months of uncertainty, legal battles, political organizing, all of it had taken a toll, but we had won. Not just in court or through legislation, but in proving that ordinary people could push back against abuse of power and create lasting change. The North Conway that existed now was stronger, more aware, more connected than it had been before. The businesses were protected. The HOA operated with transparency and accountability. The community had learned to value what it had before it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text from a new client asking if I could look at his Yamaha that was having carburetor issues. I replied that he could bring it by in the morning and got an immediate thank you in response. Just another repair job, just another day of work in the shop I had built and defended. The months continued to pass, and life returned to something approaching normal, though normal now included being recognized around town and occasionally asked to speak about HOA issues to various groups. I always said yes when I could, because I understood that our story mattered to people who felt powerless against their own HOAs. One afternoon in late spring, I was working on a particularly stubborn four-wheeler engine when a car pulled up. I glanced out and saw it was not anyone I recognized, a young couple in their 30s. They got out and approached the shop hesitantly. "Are you Lucas Quincy?" the woman asked. "That is me. What can I do for you? We are thinking about buying property in North Conway and starting a business. We read about what happened with you and the HOA. We wanted to meet you and ask if you think this is a safe place for small business owners now." I wiped my hands and invited them into my office area. We talked for over an hour. I explained everything that had happened, the reforms that had been put in place, the current state of the HOA and local government. I was honest about the challenges, but also about the strengths of the community. "The thing about what happened here," I told them, "is that it exposed problems that needed to be addressed. Now those problems are out in the open, and we have systems to deal with them. That makes North Conway safer for people like us than a lot of places where those issues are still hidden." They thanked me for my time and left. A week later, I heard through Jennifer that they had purchased a property and were planning to open an outdoor gear shop. New blood, new businesses, the community growing and evolving. By the time summer arrived, my repair schedule shifted more toward ATVs, dirt bikes, and recreational vehicles. The seasonal nature of my work had always been part of the appeal. It kept things interesting and allowed me to stay connected to the rhythm of the mountains and the changing tourist seasons. I hired an assistant that summer, a young guy named Marcus, who had just graduated from a technical program and was hungry to learn. Training him reminded me of when I had first started out, learning from an old mechanic who had since retired. The cycle of knowledge passing from one generation to the next, skills preserved and shared. August brought another milestone. The New Hampshire State Legislature invited me to testify at a hearing about potential additional HOA reforms. Other states were looking at our law as a model, and the committee wanted first-hand accounts of why the protections mattered. I drove down to Concord and spent a morning in the State House telling my story one more time. This time, though, it was not about fighting for my own survival. It was about helping other people avoid what I had gone through. Several other witnesses testified about their own HOA nightmares, and I could see the impact our law had made in giving people hope that change was possible. After the hearing, a representative from Massachusetts approached me. "We are working on similar legislation in our state. Would you be willing to come to Boston and speak to our committee?" "I am just a mechanic who got caught up in something bigger than himself," I said. "Exactly. That is why your voice matters. You are not a professional activist or a politician. You are a regular person who stood up when it mattered. That resonates." I agreed to help however I could. Over the next year, I ended up testifying in 3 different states, always telling the same story but watching it have different impacts depending on the local context. Maine passed a version of our law. Massachusetts did too, though with some modifications. Vermont was still working on it. Meanwhile, back in North Conway, life continued. The winter seasons came and went, each one a little better than the last. My business stabilized at a sustainable level, busy enough to be profitable but not so overwhelming that I lost my quality of life. Marcus developed into a skilled mechanic in his own right, and I eventually made him a partner in the business. Jennifer's hotel thrived. Dave's tour company became one of the most successful in the region. Other businesses that had struggled during the crisis found their footing again. The economic data bore out what we all felt. North Conway was back and stronger than before. The Mount Washington Estates, HOA, under new leadership, became almost boring in the best possible way. They focused on actual community needs like road maintenance and common area upkeep. They organized neighborhood events and maintained communication with residents. They did not harass businesses or make up fake rules. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. I ran into one of the new board members, a retired teacher named Donald, at the grocery store one day. He told me they used our case as training material for new board members. "We literally start every orientation by saying, 'Do not be like Patricia Pemberton,'" he said with a laugh. "But seriously, we study what went wrong and make sure everyone understands the limits of our authority and the importance of following proper procedures. Your situation taught us a lot." Glad something good came from it, more than something. You probably saved this HOA from destroying itself. If Patricia had continued down that path, the whole development would have collapsed. Property values would have tanked. People would have sued left and right. Instead, we hit the reset button, and now we actually add value to the community. 3 years after the whole mess started, I was featured in a documentary about HOA reform in America. A filmmaker had been tracking the legislative changes and wanted to profile some of the people whose stories had driven those changes. They spent a week in North Conway, filming me at work, interviewing community members, documenting the economic recovery. The documentary premiered at a film festival in New York and eventually aired on a cable network. It brought another wave of attention, but by that point, I had learned to handle it. I did the interviews, told the story, and then went back to my regular life fixing machines and living in the mountains I loved. One unexpected consequence of all the publicity was that my business actually grew beyond the local area. People started seeking me out specifically because they had heard my story and wanted to support someone who had stood up to HOA bullying. I had customers driving from 3 states away to have me work on their machines. "You have become a folk hero in the property rights community," Rachel Morris told me when she stopped by to drop off some legal documents related to finalizing the last details of the HOA settlement. "People want to patronize businesses owned by people who fight back. I just wanted to fix snowmobiles in peace. I know. That is what makes it resonate. You were not looking for a fight. The fight found you and you handled it with integrity. That is rare." As I approached the 5th anniversary of Patricia's first citation, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. My business was secure and successful. The community was thriving. The legal protections we had fought for were helping people across multiple states. Patricia had paid her debt to society and, from what I heard, was genuinely trying to live a better life. The scars were still there, though. I was more cautious now, more aware of the fragility of what we build and how quickly it can be threatened. I kept meticulous records of everything. I stayed involved in local politics in a way I never had before. I made sure to support other small business owners when they faced challenges. But there was also a confidence that had not been there before. I had faced a serious threat and not just survived, but prevailed. I had learned that I was capable of more than I thought, that when pushed, I could organize, fight, and create change. That knowledge was valuable. Jennifer and I remained close friends. We occasionally joked about writing a book called How to Destroy Your Local HOA Legally, though we never actually did it. The documentary and various articles had told the story well enough. Marcus eventually bought out half my share of the business, transitioning toward a partnership that would eventually become his sole ownership when I decided to retire. Training him and watching him grow into the role gave me satisfaction beyond just the financial aspect. The business would continue after me, serving the community for another generation. The North Conway Business Alliance continued to meet quarterly, though now it was more about mutual support and community planning than fighting existential threats. We worked on marketing initiatives, lobbied for infrastructure improvements, and served as a voice for the business community in local government discussions. On the 5th anniversary of the day I had closed my shop, Jennifer organized a small gathering at her hotel. It was not a celebration exactly, more of a remembrance and reflection. The people who had been there through the worst of it came together to mark how far we had come. Dave Merchant raised a glass. To Lucas, who taught us that sometimes you have to lose everything to save everything. I did not lose everything, I corrected. I strategically withdrew from an untenable position to create leverage for change. Everyone laughed. Over the years, I had gotten better at framing the narrative. Seriously, though, Dave continued, what you did took guts. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and hoped the problem went away. You saw the bigger picture and made a hard choice. We are all better off because of it. We talked late into the evening, remembering the fear and uncertainty of those months, the small victories along the way. The moment when we realized we were actually going to win. We remembered the businesses that had not survived, the economic pain that had been real even if temporary, the people who had been hurt by Patricia's schemes. But mostly we celebrated what we had built from the ashes. A community that was more aware, more connected, more resilient. Legal protections that would help thousands of people we would never meet. A story that had inspired others to stand up for themselves when facing similar challenges. As I drove home that night, past the now familiar landmarks of a town I had helped save, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey from that first bogus citation to this moment had been difficult, but it had been worth it. I had not sought out this fight, but I had not run from it either. And in standing my ground, I had helped create something larger than myself. My shop stood quiet in the moonlight, the garage door closed, the tools inside waiting for tomorrow's work. It was just a building, just a business. But it represented something more. The right of ordinary people to make a living, to serve their communities, to exist without being crushed by petty tyrants hiding behind bureaucratic authority. Patricia Pemberton had tried to take that away from me. Instead, she had sparked a movement that made it harder for anyone to do what she had done. The fines she had levied had cost her everything and changed nothing about my fundamental right to run my business. Her tourism revenue had disappeared overnight when I closed, proving the economic value of what she had tried to destroy. In the end, justice had been served, laws had been changed, and a community had learned valuable lessons about power, resistance, and resilience. I was proud of my role in that story, even as I remained fundamentally just a mechanic who wanted to fix snowmobiles in the mountains of New Hampshire. The stars were bright as I walked into my house, the same stars that had looked down on these mountains long before any HOAs existed and would continue long after all of us were gone. That perspective helped. The drama that had consumed years of my life was just a small moment in the longer story of this place and these people, but it was our moment, and we had made it count. That was enough.